Does Riot see mages being stronger than marksman and bot lane as an issue? So if you say that mages are viable bot laners that feel powerful down there, I definitely agree with you. But like, it's a question of like, how often do you see them and how powerful are they, right? Because what we're not going to do is be like, oh, Ziggs has a play rate, let's nerf him until he doesn't, right? And what we're not going to do is, oh, Ziggs has a 52% win rate, let's nerf him until he's the same as other AD carries, because that would actually probably make him weak down there, given that AD carries are balanced against each other, right? So just because you see Ziggs and he wins in bot lane does not mean we would nerf him. Just because you see Seraphine and she wins in bot lane does not mean we would nerf her. Especially if they aren't taking over down there. So that's the question of like, how common are mages? How common are AD carries? Things like that. Now that said, there is a degree of strength that is probably too strong for mages bot lane. And there's a degree of weakness that's perhaps too weak for AD carries. Right? One of the complexities of AD carries is that they're all balanced against each other. And so an AD carry's win rate, when you compare it to, say, a mage bot lane's win rate, isn't necessarily going to be comparable, because the mage bot lane's win rate is going to be based on like going down there and beating up certain AD carries, whereas the AD carry win rate is going to be like balanced against the other AD carries. And so like, it's very possible to have metas where all the AD carries win 50% of their games and they all suck. It's also possible to have metas where all the AD carries win their 50% of their games and they're all like insanely overpowered, right? Like, both of those things can be true, because AD carries, since there's so many of them present in the game, and almost every game has an AD carry on both teams, even right now when mages are powerful, because of that, AD carries are balanced against each other. And so their win rates will reflect their strength versus other AD carries, not necessarily versus mages, not necessarily versus, like, say, top laners or things like that. And so, yeah, it's a complex thing. It is okay for mages to be powerful bot lane. It is okay for mages to be seen bot lane. It is probably not okay for them to take over bot lane, meaning like if they're the only thing you see down there, or like one of the only things people are playing, that's probably bad. And there's some degree of power and win rate for a mage bot lane that is probably too high and would probably need nerfs. But if you don't see super insane win rates for mage bot lanes, and you don't see them super giga present, but they still feel strong, the question I perhaps would ask then is like, well, perhaps AD carries are weak, right? And so if mage bot lanes are strong, like, one of the things we could do is nerf Ziggs. Another thing we could do is give every AD carry 3 health regen, right? If Veigar bot is strong, we could nerf him. Another thing we could do is perhaps AD carries need better DPS, so that if you take a Veigar bot lane, it's a bigger trade-off, because, you know, then you're not going to have that sustained DPS that the JINX is offering you. So it's a complex thing. Then why are AD carries not allowed in other lanes? They are. The reason we kept nerfing AD carries in mid lane at the start of the season was not because AD carries were in mid lane. It was because they took over mid lane. And you know, I just mentioned that if mages were to take over bot lane, that would probably be an indication that we should do something. They should do something. When we were nerfing AD carries in mid lane, it's not just that they were strong there. They are the strongest thing you could play there, combined with being in high MMRs one of the only things people were playing there. The most popular mid laners in high MMRs were AD carries when we were nerfing AD carries out of mid. So it wasn't like we saw AD carries mid and we're like, that's not allowed. AD carries aren't allowed to mid. Delete them all. That wasn't the approach. The approach was, wow, there's 4 to 6 or more AD carries in most games of League of Legends right now, especially at the highest levels of play. Sorry, at the high level of play, this wasn't a thing in Silver. So most games of League of Legends is incorrect. It was like, hey, there's 4 to 6 AD carries in most high-level games of League of Legends. They seem to be like pushing out the other classes in mid lane. We probably need to do something to make that less true. And so the goal wasn't to delete them from mid lane versus like balance them in mid lane. Like, it's okay if Zeri goes mid sometimes. It's okay if you see a Tristana mid sometimes. But that's a big difference between Tristana and Corki being the most popular mid laners in the game in high MMR. And so that's kind of the thing going on there. Whereas if you look at mages in bot lane right now, if you like go look at the bot lane meta and you see what people are picking, right? It's like it's almost exclusively AD carries. The most common mage in bot lane right now is Ziggs with a 2% pick rate, right? And so like mages in bot lane exist, Ziggs exists, Swain exists, Victor exists, and it's definitely potentially like strong when you run into one, but like in it's basically an AD carry meta in bot. Now we can like go look at higher MMRs, right? Like what about Grandmaster? What's going on here? And you actually see a similar thing. It's like, okay, in Grandmaster Plus, you know, the highest level of gameplay, you look at it and it's primarily AD carries again. Now that said, in Grandmaster, there are some mages. Here's Victor, right? He shows up quite a bit. Here's Hui. He shows up quite a bit. Like, he's not the most popular, but, you know, they're present there. And so, is Victor strong to play, hard to play against as an AD carry? Yeah, that could be true. But, like, that's a big difference between in this state versus, like, when AD carries were in mid lane and you went and sorted by mid in Grandmaster, the people at the top weren't Victor and Silas and Yone. The people at the top were Tristana and Zeri and Corki, stuff like that. So, like, that's the thing. So if you feel like AD carries are weak, like, I think that's a reasonable thing. Like, it seems like a lot of people feel like AD carries are weak, but, like, I don't know if the game would get all that much better if we were like, if any mage has any real pick rate in bot lane, we need to nerf it out. Versus, like, if AD carries are weak and they feel weak against mages, despite mages not even being that present down there most of the time, perhaps that's just an indication that, like, AD carries might need a buff. Like, again, like some mana, some health regen, or some better base health, or some better DPS, or things like that. Yeah. Jinx is useless if the enemy team has eyes. I don't agree with that, actually. So obviously, like, it's maybe not, Jinx is maybe not in the strongest spot she's ever been, but I think in the current meta where there's a lot of tanks and a lot of front to back, and a lot of, like, other people carrying, right? Like, it's not necessarily AD carry who's going to carry. I think Jinx actually synergizes really well with that. Because as long as Jinx gets one kill, right, then she's going to carry. And so if we're in a meta where it's a lot more on her teammates to carry, Jinx can kind of, like, play front to back, stay alive, get some DPS in, and then once one person folds, she can just go destroy the rest of the fight. So, you know, it's, you know, I've been hearing a lot about, like, AD carries being kind of weak, and, like, that could be true. But of the AD carries, maybe the class is maybe a bit weak, but, like, I don't know if Jinx is all that weak within the class. I think she actually has a number of strengths that suit a, like, tankier front-to-back meta where you might be reliant on some of your other teammates to get some of those kills. Yeah. Another thing here is, like, you know, like, there's that clip about Jinx fighting Tahm Kench and she loses in a 1v1 or something. Like, I'm not going to get into whether that's correct or not, but basically the thing I will note is that in a world where it's harder to solo carry the game as an AD carry, harder to 1v1, harder to solo carry, thing like that, Jinx, again, is one of those AD carries who, like, really synergizes with teammates. And so she's going to get extra value from having the front line, extra value from having the Lulu, extra value from having somebody else on her team who can kill somebody. And so Jinx has the capability to play off of a lot of her team's strengths and carry through that.